Yeah, this works. So my name is Mark Wolfe. I'm a sort of a jack of all trades. I do a bit of development. I also a bit of a network engineer, do ops, stuff like that. So recently I've been doing a bit of work on embedded equipment and also small REST services and stuff. So I'm interested in having a look around. Been doing a bit of work with Node.js. So I started having a look at REST frameworks. And I found this framework called Hapi. It's actually being developed by, of all people, Walmart. There's an initiative within Walmart to get a lot of the legacy applications and back-end systems into mobile apps and systems that their managers and stuff like that can use. And these back-end systems, they're not really designed for having thousands of users accessing that data. They're more designed for smaller user bases. So these guys are building this framework called Hapi. It's mainly focused around REST services, and REST services particularly for mobile apps. It incorporates a bunch of features out of the box: authentication, validation, caching, batching. Now, there's a couple of features that it implements which are very, very interesting from a network engineer's perspective. But yeah, I'll go into those, mainly around batching of requests and stuff like that. Being mobile networks are reliable, these sorts of features and some of the ideas that go in this particular framework are quite interesting. So on the authentication side, the guy who developed the library and built it up is actually the author of Wolfe. So he's pretty in touch with authentication and cryptography and stuff like that. So there's actually a couple of modules. They're pretty much standalone modules that can be used in any Node app. One of the ones I've been using a little bit is something called Hawk, and there's another module called Oz. These, out of the box, it basically provides normal basic auth, Q-based auth. It also provides Mac auth, and they recently added a module to integrate Passport.js. The thing with Hapi though is they've tried to make it very Node-like in that it's comprised of a bunch of small modules. These small modules are reusable whether you use Hapi or whether you use Express or any other Restify, any other Node.js-based framework. And some of the libraries are actually also usable independent of Node, and they can use in the client. One of these libraries with a cool logo as well. Basically, it's called Joy. It's a standalone validation library. It pretty much enables you to apply some quite complicated validations to JSON data. So it's very, very handy if you've got a configuration file. Also in the client, if you've got a complex model that you've pulled out of somewhere and you want to ascertain if there's any errors in that, or you want to apply any rules, or in some cases just get all of your validation logic into the one location, then this particular library is very, very handy, well worth checking out. And the interesting part in Hapi is it's actually used to group together all of the configuration validation into one file, which is basically around this concept of schemas. So you can validate a hierarchy, or you can just validate a single element. But they've used it to validate their internal schemas, and they've used it in some of the components they've built out in the UI. As Hapi is being used to basically pretty much adapt older legacy applications to mobile access, they're basically built within the system a caching engine. They don't have a persistence engine per se. They don't have any sort of ORM. This is purely designed to cache data and present it in mobile apps. So if you've got a bunch of systems behind that, to serve REST or XML or anything like that, this particular engine will help you adapt those to mobile. Basically uses Redis, can use Mongo, can use memory. Pretty much most of this stuff is using Redis as the cache. And basically the interesting part of the caching is it's got a rule-based engine. it enables you to set all sorts of timeouts and rules around expiry of data and prefetch hooks. So if data does expire, you can prefetch it so the next request comes through, it's already in the cache. Also, the guys that have built this have been working in Node for quite a while. They know that sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. So they've built in some very, very easy to use monitoring tools. Those monitoring tools enable you to basically log together the system status like memory and CPU usage. They also give you the ability to tie in custom events. So things like when a user's added, anything like that can be propagated through the logging system and float up into the console file or be posted via HTTP. Also, they've got another module which I was having a look at, which is essentially a WebSockets-driven request debugger. So you can enable that for any router or for the entire runtime. And in real time, you'll see the requests come through into a web user interface. So you can sort of debug any issues and have a look at latency and stuff quite easily. So that's actually quite a nice little library, and it's quite well written and quite well documented, like a lot of this stuff. So you can actually pull pieces out of it if you like it. Put a front end on it, or sorry, use a different back end, whatever. They have an interesting small testing library called Shop. It enables you to do essentially request injection for Node. This basically avoids the necessity of listening on a socket and then connecting to that and transmitting data. It's pretty much all internal to Node. That particular library is just one part of their testing. They pretty much use Mocha, Node.js, and Chai. If you haven't checked those libraries out, they're all awesome libraries. They can be used either in the client or the server. Mocha is basically RSpec-like testing. Node.js is essentially a stubbing or a mocking library, and Chai is expect or should like library for JavaScript. One of the more interesting features from my perspective was this concept of batching. Basically, it's designed specifically for mobile applications, and especially where they're connected to 3G networks and stuff like that. This particular concept I could see being applied in any web framework. One of the things that actually interested me in it. The concept is that they have an endpoint where you can post an array of requests that you want to do, if you want to do GET requests, and it will respond with an array of responses. It basically has the same effect as combining assets. Mobile networks, a lot of concurrent requests can get bogged down, and you get maybe one or two of those loaded, and then everything stalls for a while. This avoids that by basically doing one request to load a whole load of result sets, and then basically dispatch those to whatever front-end code you have. So the other interesting feature was around this concept of request tails. So what they do within Hapi is they pretty much give you an interface which enables you to, once you've completed the request, you can do extra work asynchronously. This is good for basically generating stats or anything that maybe that you would normally do in a batch process afterwards to fill out the database. You can put into a tail event, but you should probably keep an eye on that and not necessarily fully trust that that executes. So if it's really basically just a shortcut to sort of offset some work while the user's doing the particular operation. A batch process can check if all those have been done later, and if they haven't, fill it in. But it's quite an interesting feature. It's done asynchronously. You can essentially chain multiple steps afterwards. They're executed essentially like events in Node. The main observations, again, I've basically worked on a whole load of web apps. I've supported a whole load of web apps and systems. So really, I just wanted to have a bit of a look over it and work out how it was going. It's only a very, very new framework. the interesting part I found with it is a very, very consistent code base. There's some really nice ideas in the code. So even if even if you're just looking for some new ideas around mobile and new ideas around web frameworks, basically go and check it out. They're doing some interesting stuff, especially for security and authentication. There's a lot of interesting info posted around that subject, especially with the author being an ex-OAuth 2 contributor. He's actually come up with an alternative to OAuth 2. Yes, but basically at the moment the API is a moving target. It's a new framework. They've got a bunch of stuff that's sort of set in stone, but some of the parts are changing quite quickly. As of yesterday, I think, or the day before, they started talking about, or they've released a release candidate for 1.0. But yeah, basically prepare to read the code. There's not a long amount of documentation, but what there is very clean, consistent, and easy to access. We've got a lot of examples and stuff like that, but it's still very, very new. So yeah, basically that's about it. I thought I'd just give you a brief overview of what that framework's got to offer. Encourage you to check it out. Mainly just for the extra modules. In my case, I'm using a couple of them now. But if you're interested in Node and having a look at an alternate web framework, it's also quite nice. Pretty much cuts out an enormous subsection of what's in Express or some of the bigger libraries, and mainly focuses in on REST. And basically the way, mainly around caching, authentication, and multi-request. So that's about it. Has anyone got any questions or? Yes?
So batching, yeah? You said, hey, you can batch up a bunch of requests. Does the processing of that response have to start after the full batch returns, or can it start once the bits that you're interested in?
Yeah, as far as I understand, they do start streaming the results as they come back from the request, so they don't come back in order as far as I understood. So it's just basically based around whichever request finishes first, comes back first, and then it'll basically stream those end to end. That's as far as I understood. Anyone else?
So HTTP2 and SPDY gives you some of these things with the batching, and I wonder if, especially if you've got control of the client and you could actually support something like SPDY or HTTP2 on the client, whether that covers like a bunch of what this is trying to do.
Yeah, SPDY and to some degree WebSockets basically give you the ability to mux multiple requests down a connection, essentially. There is still a value in being able to ask for multiple things and not have to wait for things. But yeah, again, you're probably going to revert back. If you've got SPDY connections, you're probably going to revert back to a single request model, because they're just going to be pipelined through and all responded to concurrently. The challenge is that, as far as I saw recently, there was not a lot of support for that on iOS. So I'm not sure how far that's going to go. The other thing was CDNs and stuff were a bit iffy on it as well. So it just depends. If really someone's got to ratify something before anything other than Chrome is going to use it a lot. I know there's a module on Node, and there's also Nginx is supporting it a lot more. But yeah, it's still fairly closed as far as the mobile market. The Android HTTP libraries, I don't think even support it yet, which is quite interesting.
You might not even be able to send it down to a mobile because they block all the ports and stuff.
Yeah. No, SPDY is still over port 443. So it just basically, it upgrades an SSL connection or an HTTP connection to SPDY. Anyone else? That's about it. Oh,
Ren or Stimpy?
Ah, yeah, Ren and Stimpy.
Ren or Stimpy?
Ren or Stimpy.
Which is your preferred?
Oh, Ren. But the Yeah. I used to watch it a lot when I was a kid. The author of the library is a big Ren and Stimpy fan as well, so a lot of the icons are based around that. I didn't actually make these or find these or anything.